Hello everyone, welcome to History and Culture. In some Chinese historical dramas set in ancient times, we often see men who appear effeminate, delicate, and have a graceful demeanor, such as holding their fingers in an exaggerated manner. These characters are usually portrayed as submissive and sycophantic towards superiors, authoritative and condescending toward subordinates, and scheming and vying for power among equals. Such characters are commonly referred to as eunuchs. However, throughout history, in addition to male eunuchs, there were also female eunuchs. Compared to their male counterparts, the fate of female eunuchs was often even more tragic. So, why did the profession of female eunuchs exist? How were they castrated? What was their life like? To understand this, we need to start with the selection process of palace maids in ancient China. Palace maids were the main servants in the imperial palace, and the standards for their selection varied across different dynasties. Taking the Ming dynasty as an example. According to the Ming Yian Empress Dowager's biography, in the first year of the Tianqi era, Emperor Shizong ordered the nationwide selection of 5,000 virtuous women to enter the palace. These virtuous women were mostly young girls between the ages of 13 and 16. After passing the local preliminary selection, they were sent to the capital. Upon arrival, they were divided into several groups, and were meticulously screened by eunuchs and senior matrons. The selection process was detailed and thorough. Day 1, Physical Appearance Screening. The eunuchs responsible for the selection would first conduct an initial screening based on the girl's physical appearance. Any girl who was slightly too tall, short, fat, thin, or had a hunched back was eliminated. The selection criteria were that the girls' bodies had to be proportionate and meet the standard beauty requirements. Day 2, Detailed Examination. The girls who passed the first round were regrouped, and their facial features were closely examined: eyes, ears, mouth, nose, neck, and more. Any imperfections, no matter how small, could result in elimination. In addition, the quality of their voice was scrutinized. Girls with a hoarse, deep, or stuttering voice were also eliminated. After these screenings, more than half of the original 5,000 girls were eliminated. The remaining girls entered the second round of selection. Day 3, Body Proportions and Demeanor Check. The next round of selection focused on the girls' body proportions and posture. The eunuchs would measure their wrists, fingers, feet, and toes, and also observe their walking posture. Girls with short wrists, large toes, or improper walking posture were eliminated. At the end of this round, only about 1,000 girls remained. Day 4, Strict Inspection by Senior Matrons. The girls who passed the previous screenings were not yet fully qualified. They were subjected to a final inspection by the senior matrons. The matrons would order them to strip and inspect their skin and physical features closely, even smelling their armpits to check for any body odor. According to the senior matron standards, about 300 girls were selected, considered to have potential. These girls would become palace maids and undergo specialized training. Regarding the training these palace maids received, it included not only basic manners like walking and sitting but also more detailed aspects of daily life such as sleeping, speaking, and grooming. After this training, the palace maids would face the final test that would determine their future. For those girls who met all the qualifications, they were typically chosen directly to enter the emperor's harem, where they would eventually become concubines or consorts. The remaining girls, though also selected as palace maids, were assigned to positions with varying levels of status and treatment. Palace maids were divided into several ranks. Those who were beautiful, graceful, and capable would be assigned to the emperor's or the empress's palace. This way, when the emperor or the concubines called upon these maids, it not only served practical needs but also provided a pleasing visual experience. On the other hand, Those with less attractive appearances or poor posture would be assigned to less important tasks. It is worth mentioning the origin of the female eunuch. Some may think that beautiful palace maids have more opportunities to rise to prominence, but this is not the case. The concubines in the imperial harem, of course, wish to be the most beautiful woman in the emperor's eyes. Therefore, they often require the palace maids in their service not to dress too attractively. If a maid dares to wear makeup or dress in red and green to seduce the emperor, her life will become very difficult. So, since the concubines are so wary of beautiful maids who might threaten their position in the emperor's heart, why not select some plain-looking maids to serve them? The reason behind this is actually quite complicated. Although the concubines fear beautiful maids, as they may threaten their status in the emperor's heart, sometimes they still have no choice but to keep these beautiful maids. One of the reasons is to substitute for them in serving the emperor. Typically, concubines would let a maid take their place in the emperor's bedchamber for two main reasons. Firstly, if a concubine is ill or physically unwell and unable to serve the emperor, to avoid wasting the emperor's favor, she often selects a good-looking maid to replace her and continue receiving the emperor's affection. Secondly, when a concubine grows older and her looks begin to fade, she might no longer be able to attract the emperor's interest. In this case, she would choose a young and beautiful maid to take her place and fulfill the emperor's needs. For these concubines, it seems less important whether the emperor spends the night with them or with a maid. What matters most is whether the emperor is willing to stay in their chambers, because this symbolizes their position and influence in the harem. If the emperor stays at a concubine's quarters, she will receive more respect, and her power and status in the harem will be further consolidated. From the emperor's perspective, palace maids are merely humble servants. Even if he spends the night with a maid, he might not even remember her name. To the emperor, these maids are often just tools, fulfilling his physical needs. Of course, there are special cases. If a maid is especially favored or becomes pregnant with the emperor's child, dragon seed, the emperor may pay particular attention to her. Such maids may gain higher status and even promotion due to the emperor's favor or the chance of bearing a prince. If extremely fortunate, some maids may rise through the emperor's affection or the chance of bearing a son, using their beauty and intelligence to ascend to the position of a favored concubine, or even potentially become the empress. However, the concubines naturally do not wish for this to happen. They believe that maids, who come from lowly backgrounds, even if they substitute for them in serving the emperor, should never be on equal footing with them. Therefore, when selecting a maid to replace them, concubines are very careful. They must ensure that the maid serves the emperor well, but at the same time, they must prevent the maid from receiving too much favor, which could threaten their position in the emperor's heart. To balance this contradiction, the concubines began to adopt a strategy. They had these beautiful palace maids undergo special training, transforming them into female eunuchs. Female eunuchs were palace maids specifically assigned to provide substitute services for the concubines. They played a very special role within the palace. This transformation meant that these maids not only had to serve the emperor but also became his objects of diversion in daily life, while not posing a threat to the status of the concubines. According to relevant historical records, when the term eunuch is mentioned, it usually refers to men who have been castrated. They underwent a procedure called castration, in which their reproductive organs were removed, rendering them incapable of reproduction and devoid of certain male physical characteristics. After castration, these eunuchs were usually assigned to serve the emperor and concubines in their private chambers, fulfilling intimate duties. So, how did female eunuchs undergo castration? According to historians, the procedure for female eunuchs was completely different from that of male eunuchs. After all, female eunuchs still needed to continue serving the emperor and the concubines, and their physical appearance could not undergo direct surgery that would alter their outward appearance. Moreover, They did not need to lose their sexual capabilities entirely like male eunuchs but were mainly deprived of their ability to bear children. As mentioned earlier, the concubines wanted to ensure that the palace maids did not become pregnant with the dragon seed, the emperor's child, so they wished for the maids to be infertile, but still capable of serving in bed. They needed to find a way to ensure the maids could not get pregnant without affecting their other functions. In ancient China, due to the relatively underdeveloped medical technology, there were no modern contraceptive or sterilization methods. As a result, the concubines consulted with the old palace nurses and came up with a special castration procedure. Some relatively kind-hearted concubines would typically use medication to prevent pregnancy. They would collaborate with the palace doctors to prescribe medicinal formulas containing extremely cold ingredients, causing the palace maids to experience symptoms of cold in the womb, thereby reducing the chances of pregnancy. After each night of serving the emperor, the palace maids were required to continue taking contraceptive medicines to ensure that, even if their bodies reacted, they would not become pregnant with the emperor's child. If the maid's menstruation did not arrive after a month, the concubines would have her take additional medicines to terminate the pregnancy. This way, even if a maid did become pregnant, the concubines could quietly solve the problem without anyone noticing. Some may ask, if a palace maid became pregnant, why didn't the emperor step in to protect his child? In reality, ancient emperors were extremely busy with the affairs of state, burdened with countless duties each day. Even the most diligent emperors might work to the point of exhaustion, similar to modern-day office workers. How could they possibly find the time to care about a palace maid's personal matters? Moreover, in ancient times, emperors would visit many consorts and palace maids each month. And after a few months, the emperor might not even remember what these maids looked like. For him, the fate of these maids was entirely in the hands of the consort they served. To a malicious consort, a palace maid was merely a pawn to be disposed of at will. If a maid failed to serve the emperor well, the consort might feel dissatisfied and even punish her severely. For those maids who served too well, to the point of threatening the consort's position, the consort, filled with jealousy, might resort to even more cruel methods to punish them. At this point, the maid would face an extremely brutal punishment, palace punishment. The so-called palace punishment involved tying the maid's limbs to a rack, rendering her immobile. Then, the executioner would force-feed her a large bowl of narcotic, causing her to lose consciousness. Next, the executioner would use tools such as wooden rods or iron bars to repeatedly strike the maid's abdomen until the woman's uterus detached or shifted. Removing the uterus from the body with external force was an extremely technical procedure, and even a small mistake could result in damage to other organs. The process was an immense torture for these women, because it was a private punishment and there were no medical techniques available to properly treat such injuries. The wounded maids would rarely receive timely medical attention. Old palace women would only use ash from plants to temporarily stop the bleeding, allowing them to heal on their own, with survival completely dependent on their physical condition. The fate of these maids was tragic, their bodies and minds severely tormented. And such a life often lasted until they reached the age of 25. Later, due to the high mortality rate, the position of female eunuchs was abolished. Because this position existed for such a short time, historical records about female eunuchs are scarce. It is worth mentioning that in ancient imperial palaces, there were strict age limits for palace maids. 25 was considered the advanced age for a palace maid. At this age, they would typically be sent out of the palace. And according to tradition, their career in the court would come to an end. After leaving the palace, ordinary palace maids would usually return to their hometowns with the money they had saved up, reuniting with their families. The family would often arrange a marriage for them to a decent husband, allowing them to live a simple and peaceful life, which was considered a satisfactory conclusion. However, the fate of those who had undergone punishment as female eunuchs was extremely tragic. The cruel tortures in the palace not only deprived them of their ability to bear children, but also left them with severe physical ailments. In feudal Chinese society, men typically preferred wives who were healthy and capable of bearing children. So even if a female eunuch had a family, she would have great difficulty finding a suitable husband. After leaving the palace, they often had to rely on the money they saved in the palace to survive, but it would quickly run out. Once the money was gone, they had no choice but to endure their pain, doing manual labor to make a living until the end of their lives. Therefore, the fate of female eunuchs was even more tragic than that of male eunuchs. And one cannot help but feel deep sympathy for them. This is the History and Culture channel. Liking and subscribing are the greatest help and support to us. Thank you everyone and see you in the next time.